Hello, my name is Gavin Henning, Professor of Higher Education at New England College and the past president of CAS. And we welcome you to our session on using CAS for evaluating program effectiveness and student learning. And I'll let Jen introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Jen Wells, and I am Assistant Professor of Higher Education at Kennesaw State University, and I am also the CAS editor.
So first, we're going to talk a little bit about what we hope that you'll take away from this, this recorded session. First, identify approaches to quality assurance using CAS and using a set of professional standards for higher education. Really focusing on how CAS and CAS standards can be helpful in program review and assessing student learning. And then also be able to think about how to use the self-assessment guides, which are worksheets that accompany our CAS standards to actually go through that program review process. And then we'll share a few practical tips at the end for actually implementing an effective program review process. But first, we'll tell you a little bit about CAS. So if you're not familiar with CAS, it's actually a consortium of 40 member organizations. It was founded in 1979 with a small group of organizations that now has grown up to 40, representing pretty much almost all the functional areas, primarily in student service areas in higher education. Each member of the consortium has 2 representatives, and these are the individuals who really are have the primary responsibility for developing, revising the standards, and finally approving those standards. And the reason that this is important is because we have a consensus-based approach. And so when we approve standards, they are really approved by all of these organizations and thus approved by the field for the field. We have 47 sets of functional area standards at this point. And we have 3 what we call cross-functional frameworks, which are frameworks to actually address issues that transcend any one functional area. For example, first-year experience is one of those. So it's not necessarily the office, but it is a function that is served by multiple offices working together in a team, and we provide some guidance on how to actually set up those types of teams. So CAS is about really standards, but ultimately our goal is to help develop and improve student learning success and through the programs and services that are developed. So that's really why we develop the programs and the program standards, is so that we can really help support student learning and success. So that's really the ultimate mission of CAS. And we're creating more and more resources to support the use of our standards, the frameworks, and other ways to support student learning. Now, a lot of folks think CAS is about doing assessment, and it is. And most people use CAS standards for assessment, but it can be used for a lot of things. For designing new programs and services. If somebody's designing a new program, doesn't know where to go, the CAS standards can be a great starting point. Focusing time, energy, and resources, because the CAS standards identify what are the key things that a functional area needs to do. Devising staff development. So as our field changes, the needs of staffing change because the needs of students change. So using the CAS standards as a guide for what the functional area should be focusing on helps a staff or a leader of a department identify what are those skills and knowledge that the staff need to really be able to implement those key elements. Guiding strategic planning, really thinking through in 3 to 5 years, what are those areas that a functional area wants to focus on? And the CAS standards can provide some support for that. And then obviously developing learning and development outcomes. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second, and then measuring program and service effectiveness. There are 5 principles that undergird all the CAS standards, and they really kind of support various sections of the standards. So first, the students and their environments. How do we create environments that support learning? And as our field becomes more diverse and are focused on equity, the CAS standards also focus on equity, to really think about how do we create inclusive communities and really have equitable outcomes for students. Since people and resources are keys to functional areas, there's a section, or one of our key elements is organizational leadership and human resources. So what are those resources that are needed to support that work? And obviously we need to keep in mind ethics as well as laws and policies, and how do different laws and policies guide functional area work. And then finally, learning conducive structures. So really, what are those elements? What's that infrastructure that supports student learning, to support a program area, to be able to develop programs and services for students? While this is really small, this just gives you an overview of all the CAS functional areas. You can easily find this on our website by going to cas.edu, clicking on the top menu item that says standards. You can see a list through all of those. And you can purchase individual standards, or you can purchase a whole set of standards. And we'll talk about that near the end as well. The general standards, which were revised in 2018, are really serve a couple different functions. First, it actually divides a functional area standard into 12 sections. And each one of these sections has a set of standards. So they're really a bunch of standards that really talk about the mission, standards that talk about the technology, about assessment. And then within each of those sections, the general standards are some common specific standards that occur across all functional areas. Doesn't matter what the function is. These are things that CAS believes every functional area should do. And there's an example at the bottom of the slide. The functional area must develop and define its mission. So it doesn't matter what the functional area does, that's a key piece of it. And then also there are functional area standards, which are specific to a functional area. So in this example, it's about career services and what that mission of career services should focus on. So in each of those 12 sections, there are these general standards, which we also call boilerplate, which are the same for all functional areas. And then there are more that are specific to that functional area. And then we also have standards and then guidelines. So standards are really the basic element, the most base threshold for what a program or service should do. And this just really doesn't matter what the institution is, how big, how much money it has, how big the endowment is, how many staff. These are standards that every single institution should be able to follow. So if we're looking at a set of standards for housing and residence life, those standards should be applicable to the Ohio State University, which is ginormous, to my institution, New England College, which is very small. So it doesn't matter the size or the function resources it has, those standards are applicable to all. And the guidelines are a way to really amplify and take, kick it up a notch and take a little bit step further about these are some ways to really enhance some of the practice. And the standards are in bold type, so they're easy to identify, where the guidelines are in light phase type. As I mentioned, CAS is not just about professional standards, it's also about student learning. And we have a set of domains and dimensions. There are 6 student learning development outcome domains. And then within each of these domains, there are sets of dimensions, which really can be used as outcome statements. And the expectation is that all functional areas do some focus on student learning. We leave it up to the individual functional area to decide which ones are most important and most applicable, but we think every functional area should be focusing on learning at some level. These are the learning and development outcomes that we have. So knowledge acquisition, construction, integration, and application. So really about cognitive thinking. Cognitive complexity, about reflective thinking, critical thinking, those types of things. Intrapersonal development, interpersonal development, humanitarianism and civic engagement, and then practical competence. And as I mentioned, we really think that every functional area should be doing, focusing on student learning development and success and providing evidence of that. And that's all part of that program review process and embedded in that process. Those outcomes may have looked familiar to you, and partly because they're really aligned very well with other functional area or other outcome frameworks, such as Learning Reconsidered, the essential learning outcomes from AACNU, even some discipline accrediting agency themes, the degree qualification profile, as well as Project CEO, where employers and the National Association of Colleges and Employers did a study, a project to look at what are those key outcomes. So the nice thing is you can use the CAS learning and development domains to really bridge across different functional areas. So in my institution, we use the LEAP outcomes for our institutional learning outcomes, but our student services area could use the CAS learning domains and dimensions and easily map to our institutional outcomes. So that's why this mapping is really important. So we're going to really focus the rest of this presentation on the CAS self-study process. And so I'm going to pass it over to Jen, who's going to give you an overview of that and go into a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Gavin. So I'm going to take some time to talk about the CAS self-study. I do want you to know that if this is the first time that you're listening to this, it may seem overwhelming, but we're going to try to break down all of these steps, and we do have resources available to further help you through this. So right now it's just an overview, but this could easily take a half day to talk about. So there are some fundamentals about CAS in our self-assessment process. So it's internally driven. Now what is helpful is that it's systematic and regular, and so it provides a process for you to do a self-assessment, so you're not just trying to figure out what to do. It is effective in terms of cost and time, and so there are different ways that you can approach this, but it is can be low resource driven. And it really does provide accurate information. It supports staff development, and it really can provide recognition and rewards. So what it really can do is provide this shared vision among constituents, not only within a department or unit, but also within a division and also within a university. It provides language, shared vision among individuals to really help drive this. And I think one piece that's really important about this is that honesty leads to a meticulous evaluation, which really ultimately leads to having an action plan for improvement. And so that's really at the heart of self-assessment, is that it helps us look holistically so that we can decide how we want to improve, and then creating a community while we do that. So what we provide are self-assessment guides. So Gavin showed you a list of all of the functional areas and said that you could purchase those individually or collectively. All of those also have their own self-assessment guide that we call the SAG. And so this really drives you and walks you through the self-assessment guide. It is a workbook. It has not only an instrument that you can use, but it has worksheets to help you make meaning of the information. And so on the next page, it shows you a vision of what this looks like. So this is just one small piece of the CAS SAG. This is the assessment section. And so this is what we call our general standards SAG. So you're not seeing a specific functional area here. But every section of those parts, those 12, have suggested evidence and documentation. What I like to tell people is it does not mean you have to collect all of these things, but a lot of times evidence, it becomes a place where people are paralyzed or they think they don't have a lot of evidence. And so we really want to provide examples to help you with this process. That is the most time-consuming aspect. We also clustered our criterion statements to help you out. So now here are our 7 steps of the program review process. And you can see the areas here. And I'm going to walk you again briefly through these 7 steps. So the first is to plan the process. It's exactly what it looks like. You really have to plan. Is this the right time? Do you have other assessment projects going on? And so on the next slide, it talks a little bit about some things you should think about. Are you currently in the middle of an accreditation year? Well, then it might not be the right time. If you're gathering evidence already, you want to do 2 self-studies. But you also want to think, is there, like right now, could be a good time given everything that's happening with the pandemic. It could also not be a good time depending on what your institution is doing to look at this. You may want to do it in 3 years to see what happened. But you also want to think, why am I doing this? What are the outcomes, and is there support? Then you want to assemble and educate your team. This is probably one of the most important pieces, is getting people together. And we have a lot of different ways that you can do this. And so on the next slide, we have a couple of examples here. But really, there should be a coordinator. Ideally not the unit leader, but the unit leader could maybe help with organization or facilitation, but really if you can get somebody outside the unit to serve as the leader of the team, that can really help. Plus it allows more for that objective point of view, which can be really powerful in this process. So we generally say that there's about 3 approaches, but you can also mix these and come up with somewhat like 6 different approaches. But the first is internal. And that means you're really doing a true self-study where maybe you're just using your unit or just using your division, and you're really going through and doing a true self-study. Mixternal is really you're using internal to your institution, but external to the unit. So you're pulling people, let's say your residence life, you have somebody from fraternity and sorority life, from orientation programs, counseling, a faculty member, a student, sitting on that committee and looking at your functional area and providing that perspective. And then you can have the external review where you bring people outside of the institution, generally who have expertise within your functional area. And so they can provide that information as well. One of the most powerful ways to do this is to do a self-study, either at the internal or external level, and then provide an external review that validates that study and provides additional information. We encourage you to really think about diverse representation, having people that may have some knowledge, having people that don't have any knowledge. Student involvement is really growing, and we're actually finding that students are providing some of the best feedback through the process. In the training session, what I like to do is first provide some of the information that Gavin provided at the beginning of the session, where we talk about what is CAS, why is this important, maybe some slides about why program review is important, some of the basis on where that comes from, but establishing some basis for people to understand, but creating kind of a balance of knowledge across. And you also want to establish team ground rules. A lot of times it's great to walk through the standards and guidelines, especially if you have a functional area. Maybe there's some language within there. If you're not from the fraternity and sorority community, it may be that there's some language that you're not familiar with, and so that can be provided as well. And really, if you have the time going through each standard to walk those through, it can be helpful. What I think is important in this session is to remind people that honesty is at the heart of this, that we often want to be positive, but we're trying to be as objective as possible in using the evidence to drive the ratings. And so that's, I think, really important in this situation. And then I think part of this is having expectations. Where are you, how much time is it going to take? What is the role of each person? How often are they expected to meet? What are deadlines? This is an important part at this point. Now it's time to identify, collect, and review evidence. I will tell you, you can sort of do this throughout. If you want to do that while you're getting the team together, this can happen simultaneously. But this is really the biggest amount of work on the unit, which is often why that mixed-ternal approach can be helpful, because the unit can be gathering evidence while the individuals outside of the unit are having team training and understanding the standards and doing that work. But you want to gather evidence. I think there's so much technology at this point that can help us out. People will tell you in their reviews, even 15 years ago, they put binders together, they had them divided out by sections, and you had to make a ton of copies. But with Google Drive, Teams, Dropbox, as many options as you want, you can really organize. And we generally tell people to organize by those parts, because it really helps your reviewer. And you want to get a lot of evidence. Now, one thing I want to caution, and I see this happen, is people will look at the suggested evidence, decide they didn't have it, and want to create it. So they'll say, oh no, we didn't have meeting minutes. We better go back and create meeting minutes. Well, that's not what we want to do. You almost want to think about it as a snapshot in time, and usually it's great to establish a date. Like, we're going to use all information prior to September 1st. Then it keeps it very clean and helps you really gather that information. But you don't really want to work on improving while you're doing a self-study, because it can get it all messy. I know it's the instinct, but we do caution against that. For the review team, they are going to rate all of the standards based on the evidence. And so that's what I say. So sometimes, and this is where it can get messy if you're really familiar, you can say, we know we do this, but we don't have evidence of it. Well, we want to rate based on the evidence because it may be helpful for the area to say, oh, we're operating with this mission statement, but we haven't updated it on our website. That may be an area that you can improve. And so then using the rating scale, and everybody should rate each and every measure. So, and then it talks about the next piece here is how we move forward once we've looked at the evidence. And this is interpreting the ratings. And so what we use is a two-tiered approach. And again, we recommend that each individual evaluates the standard and then collectively they discuss. What this does is help look at discrepancies. Is there a place where the evidence speaks differently to people? And so we should have a discussion. I see it means this, I see it means this, but that's also strong information for the unit going forward to ensure that they're clearly putting out the messages that they want to do or that their evidence is very clear. I often say bylaws are not often my thing that I want to read, but sometimes they can be very important. But if you think about if bylaws language is unclear, then it makes it really hard to interpret it. And so it can be similar here as you think about workbooks and policy manuals and all the types of documentation that you might have within your unit. At this point, what you can do is start to develop the action plan. So at the end of each section and part, there's overview questions. And this helps to really get that more holistic approach to the question. So you have that sort of quantitative approach to each item. And then the overview questions allow you to more get into that qualitative, providing some meaning. And we have that throughout the SEG where you can say, we gave this a 0 does not meet, but it was because we had no evidence. So we don't know, and that can provide some more information there. But what you'll do in the worksheets is you'll have a section where you identify areas of good practice, and then you develop areas of improvement. You have a worksheet to walk through discrepancies so that you can have that discussion, and then recommendations for next steps, resources, responsible individuals. Generally, the review team will do that initial part where they'll say, here's your good practice, your areas of improvement, where we had discrepancy and areas we think you should focus on. And then the unit will really take it over from there to really dive deep into that action plan. One of the other things I have found that some people do is they think this means they need to fix it immediately. Oh, we have 20 items that we should improve on. How are we going to get it done in the next week? This is not an emergency. I like to say there's no assessment emergencies. And I think that's true. This is a deep dive. This is a holistic view and it takes time. In a perfect world, it fits straight into strategic planning efforts. So then you do this self-study, which then drives your strategic plan. And as you can imagine, strategic plans are generally 3 to 5 years. And actually, some of them are getting shorter because changes are happening so much, and so more on that 3-year cycle. But you're not going to do a self-study annually. We usually think that 3 to 5 years, 5 to 7 years, depending on what it looks like. So you really want over time to make those improvements. Preparing the report, we do this, one, because I think it provides that documentation for multiple groups, which can provide evidence, but also, you know, if you've ever been somewhere where you've taken a position and there is no documentation, you don't know. We had our residence life do an external review and they hired in a new director. Well, that information is really helpful to providing background for that director to really kind of sort of research and get a lay of the land, so maybe they don't need to do a second review at that minute. But I also think there's definitely multiple audiences. Your vice president may not want the full report with every line filled in the entire workbook. They may want an executive summary about what are your areas of improvement and what are your strategies for implementing those. And so we do, there are a lot of presentations out there that look at forms. Sometimes you could do a Google search. I will tell you not all reports are created equal. So I would really look at who is your audience and what information needs to be included. And I would always say, make sure you're talking about how you're going to implement the changes. Finally, I think it really is that piece of actually implementing those changes. So I imagine we've all been there where we put a lot of work into something and then all of a sudden we don't get to do that last piece of it, or something changes. I remember I put all this work into helping with a strategic plan to find out that we were consolidating the next week. And so the plan went and halt. And so those things happen, but we really want to try to implement change. This is not an exercise just to put it in a report format and hang it on the wall, on the shelf, or to show people. This is really about the action. And I think that's where the value comes into play. And so we've seen this 4-cycle, a lot of assessment cycles may use different language, but they all essentially align with the Plan, Do, Checked Act. And so we really want to incorporate this in there. And so you want to make sure you're doing that action, requesting resources as needed, communicating the plan, letting people who participated know, hey, this is what we've decided to do, following back up with your external review committee. So we have collected some tips and lessons from a lot of our users. So these next 2 slides are directly from people who have gone through this. And so we love to remind people that CAS materials are flexible. So you can pick up a functional area self-assessment guide and it will walk you through all of the directions. It will help you through this and you can take it that way. You can also decide, we're really going to focus on part 2 this year. We're not the CAS police. We're not around looking for that. We want you to use these to help you out. So they're flexible, use them as needed. Having leadership is critical in this. I think not only at that team level, but also having leadership that says, you're gonna do this self-study and we're gonna support you having these changes. Because that can be really frustrating for staff and the morale to go through an entire self-study and then find out that nothing is going to change, it can't be implemented. Now, I can't promise you that doing a self-study is suddenly going to give you an influx of budget dollars, especially right now. I think some of us are experiencing that, and we've had these. But what CAS can do and what a self-study can do is often identify areas for reallocation of resources, where you can help move some things around where things aren't getting lost. But it can also give you a piece of evidence, but support your team to make some changes. That's where the value really comes out. Having a clear workload expectations, detailed timelines, administrative support. We've heard a lot that having administrative support to really organize the evidence, collect in ratings, help identify discrepancies, keeping things organized in the background can really help alleviate some of the workload that comes into this. Again, evidence and data is key. That's the strength here. The more evidence you have, the more informed you can be in giving your rating. Informational interviews, this is a really fun way to do this is, for example, you're reviewing a unit and you bring in the budget manager to talk about finances so you can better understand what information is in there. I mentioned fraternity and sorority life. Maybe you have somebody come in to talk about what are the different governing bodies and what do they mean and what are different fraternity sororities, helping with some of that language that the community understands but maybe others. And you can imagine this happens with each functional area, but you don't have to have that person on the committee. You can bring people in to provide interviews to fill in gaps in their knowledge. Again, being okay to be honest, I can't recommend this enough. And I was presenting with a colleague and I made the example that if I'm standing in front of a group and I've got a poppy seed in my teeth, I would hope somebody would tell me before I did the entire presentation. Hopefully I don't, Gavin. Hopefully you would have told me. But I think the point is that being honest isn't a bad thing. It helps somebody know so that we can improve. I remember when I was in residence life and I was thinking about roommate mediations, oftentimes it was about students just assigned intention, thinking that students were their roommates were intentionally doing something, but a lot of times they just didn't know it bothered the person, so it was communication. But I think all of this is just honesty to help us really see so that we can be the best that we can be. And again, I talked about allowing staff to implement changes and the power of that, looking at the rating scale, really defining what is meets versus does not meet versus somewhat. So really pulling that out, like one of the items says it does not apply, and I say that's not your get out of jail free card, rather that's okay, this is really doesn't apply because that's part of another unit, or that's just something we aren't doing because of resource allocations, or sometimes a 2-year versus a 4-year institution, although we really try to make the standards beyond institutional type. And having those rationales and justifications is really powerful. It takes time, but I think in the end it does. And one other piece that's not on here, which I'll think about adding, is when you have when you're doing a self-study, especially within a division, sometimes you can recruit people because then they get to see the inside of the process because they're going to be going up maybe next year. Or you can say, hey, if you serve on my committee this year, I can serve on your committee next year. And then you get to kind of relationship build that way. And a lot of times faculty will want to engage. It may be an area of interest with their research. Other pieces, you could look at your accreditation liaisons. They may take a particular interest because the evidence helps them with accreditation. But leave yourself time at the end to really think about pieces maybe that you struggled or where there was a lot of discrepancy so that you really have those powerful discussions. Okay. I'll also allow Gavin to provide some more information about this, but we're very excited because we are working really hard on providing more and more resources. We did a market research a couple years ago, and maybe some of you participated. And so following our own advice, we are using that information. And so we are using that to guide how we're making decisions. And one of the big pieces that we had was that we needed this do-it-yourself guide, a really hands-on approach with examples that can really help drive that. So that is coming soon. It's in its editing phase. The developing and assessing outcomes, it was formerly a FALDOS document. If you got that, I think it was like 2004, maybe 2008, one of those. And so that really helps you look at how to assess outcomes. And again, this one is written in a way that will allow you to implement that in your own framework. It looks at those areas and gives you a lot of examples on how you can do that. That is also in its editing phase. It's actually in design point. We have cross-functional frameworks. I think Gavin mentioned those. There are 3. And so we have building healthy campuses, behavioral interventions, and first-year experience. And the cross-functional are really areas where it doesn't belong in any one unit, but you're looking at multiple people being part of a team. And so we're getting a lot of really great feedback about this, and we're looking at additional cross-functional frameworks. The multifunctional review process is a document to help you if you are maybe a smaller unit with multiple functions, or you're really looking at one unit with multiple functions wanting to do a review at one time. So it helps us guide you through taking maybe 10 functional areas and doing one review. We have faculty resources specifically. We're coming out with a student kind of workbook document coming soon as well. We've got a lot coming out this summer as I think about it, because we've got a lot on the docket. But we have white papers and functional area resource papers, and we've got 3 of each of those, and I think a 4th functional area resource paper coming out, and those are really helpful. They're written by practitioners about their experiences. They're very easy to read. I've enjoyed editing them, as they've really helped me think through the process too from their point of view. And again, the 10th edition, which again, even though it's edition, it is fully 100% updated and changed. We really made a big change. If you're on the 8th edition, you're very out of date. Doesn't mean you have to go buy it today, but I would encourage you. A self-study is very good, but we really, you may not find anything similar between the 8th and the 10th, for example.
So as we wrap up, we just want to let you know that we're available to chat with you at all. We probably should have included our email address on the slide, but you can reach either one of us at our institution. You can go to either New England College or Kennesaw State, just search the directory and find us. You can also go to cas.edu and send a message through our website, through Twitter, or through our Facebook, and we'll answer any questions you have. But let us know if there's anything we can do to support you. Check out the CAS website, cas.edu. That's where you can purchase many of these resources. We also have a lot of free resources. And also that's where we'll be able to we'll publish what we have new coming out, and let folks know what's happening. So check that often. Jen, any final words as we wrap up?
I would echo what Gavin said. I think we're always happy to help, and even additional colleagues, if you want us to connect you with someone in a similar functional area or someone at a similar place, we can always do that. We're excited when you reach out, and we want your feedback. We're using it as well, so continue to send that to us, and we will continue to work hard to make CAS user-friendly and helpful for you.
Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.